Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux, here with a review for Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine is an interesting show for a lot of reasons. It's probably the most unlike Star Trek, but it has also the most influence on what Star Trek would ultimately explore in the later realms, just admittedly in the later entities of Star Trek to a lot less intellectual extent. This is really anti-Star Trek in the sense that this is kind of everything that Gene Roddenberry tried not to have Star Trek be. And yet, it is Star Trek at possibly and arguably its best. It's a really interesting and complex notion that the whole Star Trek is set in one location. This is a Star Trek where the Trek is kind of exempt, and you're just amidst the stars at this lone station off in the distant offing. And the people that come and go might have a drastic influence over this impending doom of a war that they're trying desperately not to have with the whole Dominion storyline. But this is also the Star Trek that introduced long-lasting storylines. Now, there had been in Next Generation some story threads that would carry on from episode to episode or season to season, but they didn't have any prolonged engagement, whereas this show, kind of from a very early standpoint, influenced the long season story arcs that would become prevalent in shows by the end of the 90s, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and certainly West Wing and things like that. DS9 had a huge influence in shaping television to that extent, and was doing it as early as 1993. But yeah, getting back to the notion that this is everything Gene Roddenberry didn't want, Gene Roddenberry seemed to want things that had a very lived-in feel, to feel like home. That's why the set in Next Generation has carpeted floors. He wanted you to have a sense that there is true peace that has been attained, and it's more like a vacationing craft than anything else. And this brings Star Trek back to a sort of stale-looking, almost cold outlook of what the future is. Everything is shiny steel. Everything is very metallic and very, as I say, just cold and underlit. There's no warmth to Deep Space Nine, but that warmth that you feel is because it is inhabited by characters that are rich and rife with not only conflict, internal and external, but nuance is simply the way to put it. This is a film that immerses itself in the gray. When Roddenberry wanted a show that was insanely black and white, but he didn't really want that black in there too much anyway. He wanted just kind of like a whitewash show. You hear interviews where he didn't want, in this future of Next Generation, to have conflict. That's why the Klingons made peace by the time Next Gen happened. This film immerses itself in the conflict and the shady things that are done on all sides of said conflict. Everybody in this is not exempt from having extreme and detailed flaws that form your relationship with how you perceive that character, but never diminishes it. And that is something that I think is extraordinary with this show. But it also makes it kind of the hardest Star Trek show to watch, because you aren't watching this show for an episode or two, like you can just pick up any episode you want of the original series and you're fine. If you have a favorite episode, you can watch that episode without needing to watch anything around it. And that's largely true for Next Generation and for many of the other shows that would come after, even things that I really like in the more recent Star Trek era, like the final season of Picard per se. I really like the episode No Win Scenario. I feel like I can watch that regardless of anything. Or certainly Nepenthe in season 1 of Picard. But this, like, if I were to pick a favorite episode, it's not just that I'm picking that episode, I'm kind of picking everything around it or leading up to it. It's so indebted to the story that it requires kind of a lot of the viewer, and if people aren't willing to take that, this can be viewed as one of the lesser Star Treks. And I know people who don't really respond well to this, and certainly at the time of its release, this was kind of looked at as the poorer Star Trek of the ones that were on TV. History has changed, and how we consume television has changed to the point where this is now viewed as one of, if not the best Star Treks, and the Next Generation and Voyager have a lot more detractors than they did back in the day. And I get it. But like all Star Treks, this seems, shy of the original series, I guess, this suffers from a couple things that all Star Trek seem to struggle with, which is the first 2 seasons really struggle to find their footing. There's a lot more episodic episodes in the very beginning of season 1 particularly, but that lingers into season 2 to some extent, that you can just kind of dismiss. But once it gets going, it gets fantastic. And season 3 really started to find its stride, and then season 4 brought in the Worf of it all to help move things along in a really interesting way, and how his relationship is with certain of the other characters. And then season 5, 6 are 2 of the strongest seasons of television, where there's there's certainly standout episodes, but it's not that they're standout episodes, it's that the story through the season is so enriched and so well written and stimulating, mentally, emotionally, that you are transfixed if you're engaged with it. And then this is one of the few Star Trek properties that actually has an ending. Like, yes, All Good Things is an ending, but it's it's an ending with an asterisk because it comes in the future. Voyager also has an ending and a designed one, but her character lingers in other properties, even if it's a cameo in a movie or utilization in an animated show. This one has a designed, impactful conclusion that's designed to close the book on everything, but you really get a sense that it's the end. It's not something that's going to continue in any way, shape, or form, and your time spent with these people is now concluded, and 30 years later, I'd say quite definitively it appears to be the case that is true. There's a great documentary, and I'll probably review it on here at some point, called What We Left Behind, that explores what would happen if we'd picked this show back up 20 years later, which is quite interesting, and I'll review that. But as I say, what works best with this show is how it's written, and it's written in service of character at all times. And the characters in this film are complex and interesting, and almost without exception, so uniquely to this show that they have no counterparts in any other form of Star Trek, and that is quite spectacular. Sisko is a great and compelling lead character. I do think in the first season, Avery Brooks didn't really quite have a grasp on how he wanted to play the character. He didn't feel comfortable with it, and he seemed to overact some scenes. By season 2, and certainly by season 3, basically when he gets his goatee, he is in full command and ownership of this character that you're transfixed every time he's on the screen. He's a captivating, phenomenal character with excellent performance by Avery Brooks, certainly in some highlighted episodes, which I'll probably do a top 10 episodes of this show at some point. But yeah, he's great. Kira is one of my favorite characters. She is phenomenal. Now she does have a somewhat of a counterpoint in the Ensign Rowe character, Rowe Laren. And my understanding was she was originally designed to be Ensign Rowe. She was going to go to DS9. I'm glad we didn't get that because I really love her last episode in season 7 of Next Generation and her cameo episode in Picard season 3. And Ensign Rowe is one of my all-time favorite Star Trek characters. Kira is distinctly similar to her, but then is distinctly different at the same time. And she is one of the strongest presences in this show and in all things Star Trek, quite frankly. I really like Bashir, and his character goes on an interesting journey. We have Dax. Dax is a great character, and I love Terry, what's her name, Fitzgerald, is that? She plays the character so well, and she's an actress I really quite like. I first saw her on Becker before I was a Star Trek fan, and I really liked her on that show. And to see what happens with her character throughout the course of this show is always really interesting, and I really like her relationship with a lot of the different people, and ultimately with Worf, which is exciting and unexpected. Worf is always great, need I say more. Quark is amazing. Armin Shimerman is a phenomenal actor. One of my favorite presences on my favorite TV show, which is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He played Principal Snyder. And the very first episode of Deep Space Nine I watched back in around 98, 99 was because I fell in love with Buffy so much I started following all these other people. And I watched an episode of DS9, no idea what was happening, and that's, again, where the show isn't all that inviting to newcomers. But it was a Quark-centric episode, and he's just great. Anytime he's on screen, you know you're in for absolute magic to unfold. He is so good. Now, the Quark-centric storylines don't always work for me, but I'm able to forgive them because I love him. He's so good. And he works better when he's in a scene with a different actor, and how they interact with Quark always makes me excited. But it's O'Brien for me that steals the show. Now, he's a character that I really liked in Next Generation that was always underutilized. And in this, quite frankly, he's also underutilized. I would have put him much more at service of the story and in the story front and center, but that's not how he was ever really designed, right? And the way that he is used and utilized throughout this show, he is filled with so much pathos, and he's so fantastic. Absolutely amazing performance by Colm Meaney, who I really like. He's an actor I first saw before either Star Trek's in a movie called The Man Who Went Up a Hill But Came Down a Mountain. He played a bartender in that, and he was really quite good. And but he's a phenomenal actor, and I love that they brought his character from Next Gen into this, and how they reference Next Generation quite a few times in meaningful ways in the very final season after Worf undergoes a great tragedy. How he tries to utilize time spent on the Enterprise to connect with Worf is really quite beautiful, and then the final episode and everything. But anyway, character is where this show shines. And it's not only character, it's the ability to tell dark and interesting storylines about one of your main characters who's a terrorist and an active one, and how they were talking about stuff that are would become incredibly relevant by the time the show really went off the air, or within a year or two of it, and is incredibly relevant now. Yet they even talk about this in that documentary, What We Leave Behind, is you really can't write the show the way it was written now, because there would be too many concerns of making or saying your character do these things that public may not respond to. Yet they did, and they did it without, with extreme care, but without thought to the consequence of what people might think of these characters. And in service of the characters and always being character motivated, they were able to tap into something really quite magical. Deep Space Nine is Star Trek at its finest in its televisual format. Its visuals are dated, its use of like filming technique is a bit antiquated compared to what we have today, but the richness in storytelling is where it's at. And I've always maintained that the original series of Star Trek, particularly that first season and half of season 2 of the original series of Star Trek, is the best Star Trek has ever been, because they allowed story of those individual episodes to be the driving force of the show. It was quality writing from front to back. And this is that put into long form. So this stands alongside the first season and a half of the original series as being the best at what Star Trek is capable of offering. It's mentally stimulating. It is smart. It is emotional. It's always engaging, as long as you're willing to engage with it and willing to tackle hard subjects that don't have easy answers, or maybe not have answers at all. That's where this show gets really good. And I also include in that the last season of Star Trek Picard. I know a lot of people think it's very fan servicey. I don't see it that way. I think it's much more intellectually stimulating than some people may diminutively think of it. But anyway, DS9 is phenomenal. It is like a good use of your time if you have the time to commit to the full 7 seasons, and you'll need to really go through all of it. I will give you my top 10 list, but those top 10 episodes may not have your favorite episodes, because, as I say, unlike most other shows, the episodes that surround it create so much nuance that there is no real, like, amazing episode. It's more like there are amazing seasons. And so the ones I'll give you as my top 10 are going to be largely one-off episodes that don't have much impact on the larger story, but that's not to say that the larger story is bad in any way. It's what makes the show extraordinary. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of this show in the comment area down below. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Follow me on TikTok at State of Flux. Thanks for watching. Peace.